Order, order. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. We continue this morning with evidence in relation to an inquiry into reforming the water sector. We are pleased to be joined with us this morning by representatives of Northumbrian Water and later on Welsh Water. So Heidi, Mottram, Andrew Beaver, welcome to the committee. And can I ask you, please, for the benefit of those following our proceedings and indeed for our own official record, to explain to the committee who you are and what your role is.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So my name's Heidi Mottram and I'm Chief Executive of the Northumbrian Water Group. So just for information, because I think we're slightly unusual in our makeup, we operate as a water and wastewater company in the northeast of England, but we also operate Essex and Suffolk Water in the southeast of England, where we just provide water-only services there. So that's largely the group.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, slightly unusual, but by no means unique.
Not unique, but,
yeah.
but probably a little bit unusual, and I think our name can sometimes be misleading because it infers the northeast, so I thought it was worth clarifying.
Andrew.
Hello, so I'm Andrew Beaver, I'm the Regulation Assurance Director at Northumbrian Water, so my responsibilities tend to include developing forward-looking business plans, strategy, and those sorts of things. Mm-hmm.
And Andrew, am I right in thinking you were previously part of Ofwat, the water regulator, Director of Strategy there? Is that correct?
So I left Ofwat in 2016, and then I went to work in a professional services business for 4 years. So I was out of the sector for a little bit, and then I joined Northumbrian Water in 2020.
So does that make you a gamekeeper turned poacher, or a poacher turned gamekeeper?
I actually think it's an advantage, to be honest, to have worked across both sides, because I think that we actually need to bring those different perspectives.
Okay, Heidi, can I just offer you, first of all, the same opportunity? You know that we've had evidence from a number of other water companies. Tell us a bit about how you run the company, what culture you see as being important. How important to you are the environmental impacts? How important are things like customer engagement and public transparency?
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So I think I begin by saying that I feel very proud to work alongside over 3,000 people who are very, very passionate about what they do and work incredibly hard, often in very challenging circumstances, to deliver services to customers. And collectively we set ourselves a vision, and it's serious, taken very seriously in the business of being industry leading across all the metrics that we know are important to our customers. Now, I wouldn't say that we were perfect in all of those metrics, that's certain. We try very hard. We are leading in a number of them, upper quartile in others, and there are areas where we need to improve. But it does drive us, and so I think to your point, Chair, about culture, there is a very strong understanding of what's important. It's derived from what our customers tell us is important. Of course, customer service, environment, clean water, being a good citizen in our communities, keeping our employees safe, being a great place to work. All of these things are part of that. But there's a very clear line of sight in the company as to how everybody contributes to that. And one of our strong values is to be one team and to go about doing that business in a very ethical way. So if you were to come and visit us, I'd be very happy if you wanted to do that and talk with our employees. They would talk about that, and they would talk about how that drives them and how they want to be the very best that they can be. And I think that's hopefully what has led to the company performing towards the upper quartile, if not the upper quartile, leading in many respects. But it also drives us when we're not doing things right to get better and to learn.
Okay, can I just first of all look at some of the corporate governance within the company? Can you tell us who owns Northumbrian Water Group Limited, which I think is the parent company then of other companies? So talk us through the ownership of that.
Yeah, so it's actually up until very recently been very simple, because the company was wholly owned by Chong Kong Infrastructure, which is part of the wider Chong Kong Hutchinson Group, which is a Hong Kong-based listed entity. You're probably aware of that. So they were 100% owners, but I think it's about 18 months ago now, 25% of the business was sold to KKR, which is also a listed entity,
So in New York.
Yeah. So it's a very simple structure. We've gone from being wholly owned to being 75-25.
Mm-hmm. And that's 50% to CK Hutchison Holdings Limited and give me the percentages then if you can.
So I think it's 50% to Chong Kong Infrastructure, which is really the controlling part.
Yeah.
So Chong Kong Infrastructure is the part of the group that's also invested in our country in electricity distribution, gas distribution. It's an infrastructure specialist. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of the ownership is the wider holdings part, and that's just, I guess, the way that it makes sense in Hong Kong for those to come together.
Right, and then the Northumbrian Water Group Limited owns owns wholly Northumbrian Water Limited and NWG Commercial Solutions Limited, is that correct?
Yeah, because we do some work outside of the regulator business. The vast majority of our business is the regulated companies that I introduced at the beginning, but we do operate some PFI operations on behalf of Scottish Water, and until recently we did not dissimilar work in Ireland, but in Ireland they've taken that back under public control. And then we also, somewhat unusually, operated in partnership with the Government of Gibraltar, the Water Services on Gibraltar, which is a legacy contract from about 20 odd years ago. But that's also recently gone back into public ownership. So about 10% of our operations are in that group entity, but 90% of the operations are in the regulated Northumbrian Water Limited.
And then they in turn have a number of financing subsidiaries and trading subsidiaries, do they?
I mean, which...
We're just taking this from your annual report.
All right, okay. So there is one entity that is a mechanism to move money between us and the owner. That's all that's there.
Just the one subsidiary?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's very helpful. So looking then at some of your financial positioning, you have a gearing that has been consistently around 70%. The forecast for your own business plan is for that to rise to 73%. Ofwat say that you should have a gearing level of 55%. Is your business sustainable?
I think we would definitely take the view that in infrastructure businesses, a gearing level around about 70% is a very normal gearing level. But I can see that Andrew probably wants to talk you through the notional company versus gearing, just to give you perhaps a bit more information about that. But we would say that that's a sustainable level. You would see it in a lot of other infrastructure businesses.
We know that because we've seen it. But still, 55% is the Ofwat target, and you're sitting, as others do, around about 70 and going north of that. Does that tell us something about the relationship between a company such as yourself and Ofwat as the regulator?
I'm not quite sure what's beneath your question there. But
if Ofwat tell you should be at 55%, you say, well, actually, we're 70, we're quite relaxed about going to 73. You don't seem very bothered about the views of the regulator, do you?
So I think that Ofwat has always established something called the notional company, and I'm conscious Andrew wants to explain why that concept, and that's where the 55% is. So do you want to come in and maybe explain that a bit more?
If you were in your old job, Andrew, and you saw this continued discrepancy, what view would you have taken about it as a regulator?
Well, so I think Heidi's right. Ofwat uses a notional company to set price controls, and that's a benchmark. And Ofwat has set that benchmark at 55%. So you're absolutely correct about that. I think what I'd say about that benchmark is that it's quite unusual in comparison to what other infrastructure businesses are leveraged at. So Thames Tideway is at 80%, Heathrow is at 80%. I think there's room for a sensible debate about what the right level of gearing is of water companies. At the moment, our gearing, as you said, is at 70%. It's 1% above the industry average, and until a few months ago, it was well within the range that the rating agencies would give for a Baa1 credit rating, which is what Ofwat uses when setting the price controls. So I personally don't feel that there is an issue about the financial resilience of our business.
When Ofwat say that you are a company in the elevated concern category, are they wrong about that?
So I think it's fair to say, as I said, that we're 1% above the average gearing in the sector. And we've
heard that from other companies. What I'm wanting is an explanation about your performance against the Ofwat target.
And what I'm trying to say is that we don't see 70% leverage as a financial resilience issue, and we talk about it very regularly at the board. And if we did, then I'm sure that as a business we'd be doing something about it. We are trying to de-lever, because the ratios get tighter the higher up you get. But what I'm trying to say is that I don't think the 55% is either a target or necessarily the right number.
In what sense is that 55% then a meaningful target?
Well, it's used to set the price control, so it does have an impact on companies, because the further you are away, the more problematic it is.
What impact is it having on you when you're going from 70 to 73% then?
Well, it encourages us to think about how far away we are from it. But if I went back,
if you have that conversation with yourself and you say, well, that's fine, we're getting further away from the target, what does that say to you?
Well, for example, the business plan requires us to get £400 million of equity from our shareholders, and we've been having very active conversations with them about that for a number of years, as we've headed towards the determination process, which finished in December. So for example, that's an example of what you're talking about, to make sure that we're investing enough equity in the business as well to maintain that financial resilience. I think what I'm trying to say is that Ofwat's 55% number is not the definitive answer on what is the right financial resilience of a water company. I think I would look at what the rating agencies say. They're independent experts in this area as well, and I'd look at other information. And as I say, I think there's room for a sensible debate about what that number is, but I'm not sure it's 55%.
Well, having been on both sides of the fence then, does that not raise some concern about the relationship between the companies and the regulator?
I think it's absolutely right that the regulator is challenging the companies to improve, whether that's on gearing or whether that's service performance or cost or whatever. So I think that tension always needs to be there. Okay.
You mentioned there, but we'll come back to you, Heidi, on this. Your PR24 business plan is contingent on securing 400 million equity investment. How likely are you to achieve that?
I think, as Andrew said a moment ago, this has been an active discussion with our investors, our shareholders, for quite a number of years. So they're anticipating this move, and we're having a debate about when the most appropriate time to do that is. So that's an active and positive discussion. But you'll also be aware, I guess, that we have asked Ofwat to refer our final determination to the CMA, and the shareholder will also be interested in that dialogue as well. But they do stand ready to make this happen at the appropriate time, so we've not got any concerns that at a moment in time that will be forthcoming and that the business will be able to deliver its plan. Did you want to add to that, Andrew?
I was just going to say, whenever someone is investing money, obviously they need to make a reasonable return on that investment, and that is one of the fundamental questions that we've referred to the Competition and Markets Authority, because we don't feel that an equity return of 5.1% plus inflation when you could get 6.2% on a corporate bond is necessarily going to be very attractive, and that's one of the challenges, particularly if we're trying to put this sector on the right long-term investment footing, where we were probably going to need a lot of equity capital, not just now, but in 5 years and 10 years and so on.
And do you think you're on that trajectory?
I think I think that a lot, the building blocks are there. I think some of the decisions in the final determination might be okay for 5 years, but not necessarily supporting us for the next 25 years.
I mean, you've taken your reference to the CMA on the basis of a determination that came in at 3% lower than your ask. Is that correct?
Well, I think one can look at the number you're quoting is the total expenditure allowance. So, that's clearly an important figure. I think the things that we are asking the CMA to redetermine and look at are, go beyond that. So I mentioned the appropriate investment return, but the two bigger areas that we were concerned about, one is about asset health, where we have made a targeted case for some more investment, because at the moment we are not spending enough in maintaining the asset base as an industry, in our opinion, and that case was refused. And also looking at the impacts of extreme weather driven by climate change. So we see far more severe weather events. Those have a big impact on the performance that customers receive, and we asked for some targeted investment to make our assets more resilient to those types of severe weather events. And in both cases, Ofwat hasn't provided the funding, and we think that those are important issues to resolve for the next 25 years, as I said, not just the next 5 years.
Okay, well, we're going to come on in a minute or two to the questions of asset resilience, so I'm not going to dwell on that for the moment. But Heidi, to come back to you, you've overspent your allowances in the current price review period. You've been permitted now to spend £6 billion in the next 5 years, but only £5 billion of that is going to be coming from bill increases. So where is that extra billion going to come from?
I think at a very high level, and it's quite interesting to note those two figures. We were just talking about those a couple of days ago. So the difference will broadly come from additional equity, which we talked about a few moments ago, and then we'll have to very carefully measure and manage, again, really to your debate, how we manage debt. So we'll be trying to get the right balance between equity, debt and customer revenues to get that absolutely right.
But the extra equity is 400 million, and the remainder?
Will come through us balancing the way that we're borrowing money and paying money back.
Okay. Right. We'll leave it there for the moment. Helena, can I ask you to lead the questioning on asset resilience and water security?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hi. I wanted to pick up particularly on the issues around water supply and how well your company has maintained its assets and ensured the supply to customers in recent years. So particularly in the area of your operations, Essex and Suffolk Water, we know there are massive supply issues here. It's described as one of the most water-stressed areas in the entire country. Have you done enough in recent years to make sure you are preparing for water supply issues?
I think that if we start with Essex, for example, so you're quite right in the first instance to say that East Anglia in its broadest sense is one of the driest areas of our country. So if you look at the history of Essex Water, we began having concerns about the amount of water that was needing to be available in that part of our operation 20 years ago. We went, I think we'll all recognise the planning issues related, but ultimately that led...
You didn't build any reservoirs, did you?
Pardon?
You didn't start planning any reservoirs then? You haven't built any reservoirs?
Oh yes, what we did was we expanded an existing one by 60%. Okay? So which was a massive increase. So that resolved that issue.
It didn't resolve the issue because you've still got major
water
supply issues.
If I come on to that, so we plan over the long term in partnership with the Environment Agency, with local authorities, to look at exactly what's needed and how we might manage that. So when we were managing for that, we were doing that in partnership with all those, and there was a belief that if we expanded Abbott's reservoir called Abberton, near Colchester, by 60%, this would give long-term resilience. That was £140 million worth of investment. And it's interestingly one of the few reservoir investments that's happened in our country for quite a while, but it was making an existing reservoir significantly bigger. But since then, the Environment Agency has begun to take a different view about abstraction from the environment and also about the potential impacts of climate change. And those views are also driven by the government's own views about climate change changing as well. So having made that investment, those new changes in how we look to the future are beginning to put some more pressure on again. So that means that we have now started to plan for the next moves. So there will be some moves, albeit of a relatively minor nature in Essex, some additional treatment processes. The biggest challenge is actually more to do with Suffolk. Okay.
I'm a bit confused. When you're thinking as a water company how you forecast your supply over the next few decades, like any company would be thinking about their future demand from consumers and from the community.
Yes.
Do you rely entirely on the Environment Agency? You don't do
No,
your own forecasting?
No,
because you seem to be blaming the Environment Agency.
No, not at all. No, there is a well-formed process called the Water Resource Management Planning process. It's working throughout the country, and it's a very established and formulaic process that we all work on together. So obviously we have a role in that. The Environment Agency just prescribes some elements of what we build into that model, and then we take, for example, growth in households and growth in businesses, the information from local and central government that is being planned for, because obviously they would have that knowledge, and this is all going into a model that allows us all together to look at what needs to be done, and then we would put forward a plan that the Environment Agency and the local authorities and ourselves would believe was the right plan to the business planning process with Ofwat, and then they would agree with us the most efficient way of doing that. So this is an established process that's going on in the whole country. It's not.
I appreciate that, but
it's
do
a
you feel
partnership process.
That process is actually sufficient, given we're now in 2025, we've run the company for 15 years, and we're in a situation where businesses in this area that we're talking about are being told they cannot have new mains connections until 2033. And their growth is being inhibited. We've had a lot of complaints from local businesses, local farmers, that are feeling the lack of planning, the lack of foresight on water supply and predicting that going into the future. Whoever is responsible for that is having a really big impact on those communities and on holding back economic growth there.
I think we're very aware of that, and we're working with the businesses under the auspices of the Chamber of Commerce to see how that can be managed better to help those businesses perhaps be more efficient in their use and share that water around. But it is this process, and this is quite an interesting thing that's happened in Suffolk, and we're actually continuing this dialogue. I'll be meeting with the Chief Exec of the EA next week to see if we can look at this formula and this model perhaps a bit differently to ease some of these pressures.
Do you wish, looking back, I mean, you've been in the role, been at a company for 15 years, I think you've been Chief Executive for 15 years. Do you feel, looking back with hindsight, you wish you'd done more to plan for these issues and to build more supply into the system?
I think that we worked with the information that we had. So if the process, if I start saying we need to build in more and more resilience, that the evidence of local authorities about what they expect business growth to be, or the Environment Agency expects as abstraction, it's not, this process is not allowing a water company to say, I think we need to do more, because that would be deemed an inefficient investment for the customers to pay for, because we could potentially end up providing too much that doesn't get used. So we were using the very best information. I know it's not a good outcome that things change significantly such that we're now using different information, but that is the reality of what happened in a very small area in Suffolk. In our other operating areas it worked well, so that's what allowed over a period of time us to plan for and invest in Aberton, and then in the North East we have very good water supplies. So it does work well, but it is a very collaborative process that is relying on multiple sources of information, not just the water company.
I think there's some clear takeaways for us as a committee from that, and the way that process works.
Think about how it's working, and
it's not
perhaps
working
the degree of redundancy or resilience that it is allowing in that process might be something the committee wants to think about.
Yeah, and do you feel, in light of the fact that this area is one of the most water stressed in the country, there are other issues in your company around leakage? And the amount of water mains that are bursting and leaking water into the environment, while at the same time businesses are being told they have to cut down their water usage and not put any new mains connections on. So it just seems that people will find that contrast strange, that on the one hand you've got mains bursting all over the place because the pipes haven't been maintained, and on the other hand that's what businesses and residents are being told.
Okay, well, I think I would probably challenge your characterisation of bursts all over the place. In our Suffolk operation, leakage levels there would be amongst the lowest in Europe. So we have a very, very low level of leakage. In the Essex and Suffolk area combined, it's the lowest level of leakage in this country. So we work really, really hard. Our teams work incredibly hard. And I think, we've got a good record there. We're never, ever complacent. So we're continually looking at new technologies, satellite technologies to drive that down. really interesting innovation that we have brought into the industry and is now being adopted, which is a revolutionary way of fixing pipes from within in partnership with an innovative company, and now everybody is adopting that. So these are driving that already very low level of leakage even lower. So I think we're in a very good and strong position in Suffolk, even though our teams will always try to improve because it's the best in this country.
Perhaps in other areas of your operation, the record is worse. I mean, we were told about an incident in Sunderland where Chester Road in Sunderland had to be closed twice within 6 weeks. The residents lost their power twice because of a burst main happening twice in the space of 6 weeks.
Yes, so I'm aware of this incident, and when the pipe burst the first time, in the process of fixing this, and I'm trying to avoid getting a bit techie here, you can sometimes create a pulse, a vibration that causes another burst a little bit further on. So unfortunately we did get two, but that is quite an unusual thing, and we were really, really sorry for obviously for the residents of that road, and we went in and we've done a lot of work with them to make sure that their businesses are compensated for that.
What compensation were residents and the businesses given?
I'd have to come back to you on the exact details of that because they were very bespoke to individual companies, but they were actually not off the water supply for very long at all, because one of the things you might have seen in the records about Northumbrian Water is, although some of those things can happen, and you've heard Andrew talk a moment ago about the fact that we've been making an argument quite strongly that there needs to be more investment in mains renewal beyond where we are, but we are exceptionally good at keeping people on supply. So we're industry leading at that. So even when we do have those bursts, one of the things that we have realised that the customers are interested in staying on supply. So our first action is always to keep people on supply. We can do that by rezoning water or laying temporary piping, or we have some special vehicles we can take to site. All that will keep people on supply while we fix the burst, as opposed to people having to wait to fix the burst. And that's led us to be the industry leader in supply interruptions.
We've talked a bit about your supply issues and the planning for the future. Obviously, you yourselves have admitted that there is going to be a lag in when you can create that extra capacity, get more reservoirs online, and supply the people who need to be supplied at the moment. So in that interim period, we've heard suggestions from you that you will be making more use of water recycling schemes. Obviously, you are already using water demand management, and we've heard about the economic impact that's having. How do you feel about that going forward? How do you plan to engage with those communities?
Well, we already have engaged hugely. So as I said, in the business community, we formed a business group so that collaboratively we can work together to see who's using what water and how that could be managed. That's already had some really good success where we found businesses, and it's nobody's fault, we're potentially using water in a way that could be better, because we have a lot of expertise in this area, so we work with them and we're sharing that knowledge, and I think that's a really positive thing. Another thing which we're doing, which the main area in Suffolk that is drier is the bottom end of Suffolk, not so much the top. So that area is called Hartismere, and we are heavily putting in smart meters into that area. I think we're on about 85% of that area now with smart meters. In a couple of weeks we'll be over 90%. And when we do that work, we don't just, if you like, show up and start putting meters in. We have a community vehicle that goes around. It's quite a rural area, I don't know if you're familiar with it. And we talk to our customers about how they could use water better, because not everybody thinks about this. It's not necessarily the front of their mind, and they're very interested in how they could use their water more efficiently. If they know we can do things in their property that help them use their water more efficiently, we can share information, and that's been a really positive event.
I just think what a lot of people take away from this is there's a lot of onus being put on customers and on local businesses, and not so much on the future planning and the forecasting that I think, whatever the process you've outlined, a lot of people would expect would sit with the water company. But I think I'm conscious of time, and I know we need to move on. Andrew, I wanted to ask you about your role at Northumbrian Water, and as the chair touched on, you previously worked at Ofwat. Yep. And I know there has been a lot of concern expressed about this trend we seem to have of people taking roles in the regulator and then moving into a water company or going back the other way, the revolving door it's been referred to. Do you understand why people are concerned about that?
I understand the concern. I think, all I can say is, in my own case, I left Ofwat in 2016. For the first 2 years after I left Ofwat, I was subject to business appointment rules that constrained what kind of work I could do. And I went to work in an infrastructure business that was working in all sorts of other sectors in all sorts of parts of the world, and I had a great time doing that for a few years. When I came back to Northumbrian Water 4 years later, there's a very big gap. And I don't really believe that there's any advantage conferred. I suspect if you look at the amount of litigation that Northumbrian has been under since I arrived, it's probably more than my predecessor. So I don't, far from an advantage, I say there's almost a disadvantage. So I understand the concern. I think it's probably, I think the constraints and the rules that are there work. And I would also say, I think there's, as I said at the beginning, I think there's an advantage. There's a need for regulators to understand better what it's like in a company and vice versa. I think actually that would be very helpful to to some of the challenges that we've got. I think increasingly what we see with our regulator is, almost a focus on my model says the answer is X, and less of a calibration to what's actually going on in the real world.
And just final question while we're touching on other roles. Heidi, I was reading that you are, as well as being CEO, you're also on the CBI board, and you're a non-executive director of Eurostar International. Do those roles take up a lot of time?
I'm afraid what you've been reading is out of date, so I'm not currently in either of those roles.
Okay, so you're fully dedicated to your water role?
I definitely participate in a number of I guess in the operating areas, we find it very useful. For example, I'm chair of a Net Zero North East England, which works collaboratively with the mayoral combined authority there, and businesses, the third sector, to look at how the whole region can perhaps move itself towards a net zero. We contribute hugely to that. So I think it's really important that we do play that wider role in society in helping other things. So I do other things than just purely.
I think people would look very well on things that are, playing a role in the community, but I think there has been concern expressed previously about the amount of time other roles, commercial roles, take up when you're being a CEO of a full-time company, and how you juggle those. And obviously previously you were. No,
I would want to be transparent with you, because although those two roles I'm not currently doing, I am on the board of another company. And I think, it's not unusual for chief executives to take, and I only have one non-exec role in another commercial company. And that helps me have a broader perspective on how companies operate. We can best practice exchange. It's in a not dissimilar infrastructure-related sector. And so I find that very useful. I learn things. I take best practice also from my company into theirs. So I think diversity of thought and challenging your own potential norms, I think, is a very positive thing, but only within reason. And that's why I only do one of those.
You don't see any conflicts of interest?
Of course, I wouldn't be allowed to have a conflict of interest in that scenario. So there's no conflict of interest. I think it helps chief execs have a better perspective and to think about doing things differently rather than just one sector, one way.
Andrew, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just to pick up on one answer I heard during Helena's questioning, which was two things that didn't seem to sit well as far as I could work out as a teacher. One of them was acknowledgement that there is the moratorium till 2033, I think, around some stuff, matched with a statement that you thought there's lots of great words like collaboration that we all use in the world, that all of that's working well. So I don't live in Essex and Suffolk. I live near enough to it not be a surprise to me. We live in a region which has got water stress. So it isn't, to me, a new thing. Generations of my predecessors would have known that as well. So I'm interested in, if the system's working well and we've got this big time lag, how can the system be working well? And is that an issue of your business model? Because you talked something about not being able to build predictive investments wouldn't be regarded as good value for money. So where's the blockage? Is the blockage your business model? Is it regulation, or is it you didn't have the data to actually realise there'd be a problem and now we've suddenly got a problem?
I think this is potentially because you've focused on it, a really interesting area for the committee to perhaps look a little bit further into, because the water industry is working on a system that's effectively being devised by government, and we are all working in exactly the same way to it. And I don't say that by saying it's anybody's fault. I'm just saying that there is an agreed legal process that we are all following in order to decide how to predict water for the future. And the water company is one part of that, but there are also other parties in it. And it's not necessarily the wrong system. It's trying to gather up all the best possible information at a moment in time to be able to model and predict what might happen over a longer period of time. Because you're quite right, this is an area where we do know there's water stress. So when we were doing the water resource management plan before the one that we're currently in, which has triggered this particular problem, people were looking out a long distance and making predictions. We were, the Environment Agency was, the local authority were, and we were populating that model. These models are working in exactly the same way everywhere else in the country, so that's why I say it might be an area that you want to just explore a little bit more about how that model works. It's a very technical model, and we are required to follow it in a particular way. So,
in your experience, was the model wrong? So the model didn't show we'd end up where we
changed.
are now?
Yeah. So effectively, the assumptions have changed. So the Environment Agency changed some assumptions about the impacts of climate change, which were derived from government predictions, and the abstraction from the environment. So water that we previously would have assumed we could use, the Environment Agency said, no, you can no longer use that. That was one element that put stress on the model. And then the non-household demand rose more than had been predicted. So the two things created a stress that we've now got, and we need to deal with that. So that's what we're trying to work through now as fast as we possibly can. But it has been a function of the water resource management planning process. So you might want to explore that a bit more, but that's what's driven it. Did you want to come in and add something?
I was going to say, so the issues that have created the deficits that are driving the problem have come from reductions to the amount we can extract from the environment and increases in demand. And neither of those things there were some other things like climate change data got a bit better and so on, but those were the two key things that have driven the deficits. And it's worth asking, could we have had better information in those areas? Could we have better predicted that? That's a reasonable question. Sometimes, you can't predict the future, right? So sometimes you just get better information and therefore you get the problem. And I think there's probably a bit of both.
Is it perhaps the model of your company that might be partly explaining this? Because, they always say a stitch in time saves nine. Maybe it would have been better to plan ahead, create that extra capacity. I appreciate, Heidi, what you said earlier about we didn't want to create more water supply than was needed, but maybe the calculation made within the company was we don't want to create more supply than is needed because it will cut profits.
No. So I think what we're trying to explain is that there is an established model in the country, and we have to follow the model. We're required to follow the model. We can't.
You're actually not allowed to go beyond that.
No, we have to follow that model because everybody's worked hard, and I'm not pointing the finger. Everybody's worked hard to try to use that model as a method of predicting this. So we would run into a wall if we tried to add more things in that weren't allowed within the model, because we would then have to go to Ofwat and say we want to do something outside of the model, and Ofwat would typically follow the model, as would all the other government regulation bodies. So I understand it's a problem, we're not happy either, but it is a change in assumptions and scenarios from one model to the next that's causing this. So now we think our job is to work as fast as we can, to work with the businesses, to see what they can do, to get smart metering in, to make sure that does as much as it can do. You're quite right, on leakage we're very low, but we will push harder, and then we will run as fast as we possibly can to build new resources, and we're hopeful that the changes in the planning system will help us move faster on that.
So have you been shouting from the rooftops, dear God, if you don't allow us to do this differently, we are going to have customers who won't get connection until, what was it, 23?
Well, I'm not sure I would characterise it as shouting from the
Well,
rooftops,
I mean, if it was my business, I think that's what
yeah,
I would be doing.
Yeah. So we think the right thing to do is to talk to the people who are involved in that, and in particular the Environment Agency and the local authorities, to see if there is a better way of doing this. But we would have to probably come outside the model to do something different at the moment, and we don't have the authority to do that. That's why I'm very keen to talk with the Environment Agency. Does this come to the structure
and the culture of the whole industry here? It's all about process, it's not about outcomes for your customers.
I think the processes have been very well thought through and very well defined and have typically served things well. Sometimes, when things change more rapidly, they haven't, and this is a case in point, I think, with Suffolk, where the system has not worked as well as it could have done. So we're very keen to work with government, to work with regulators, to work with local businesses, MPs, the whole system, to see if we could do something with this particular situation to make it work better.
It looks like we're heading back to that part of the map marked the operation was a success but the patient died. Sorry, Helena, you wanted to come in.
Heidi, I'm just looking at Ofwat's response to your plan in 2013, the draft determination from Ofwat, and that is under your time as CEO, because you've been in post 15 years, and they do say, and I quote, "We cannot find evidence in the draft plan that the company has consulted local authorities on its population forecasts." So that doesn't actually seem to be that collaborative process that where everybody around the table kind of puts their hands up and admits. That seems to be Ofwat saying, actually, you guys could have done a bit more digging and forecasted a bit better, to Alice's point.
Comment on that?
So, I mean, this sort of predates me, but I wouldn't conclude from that single reference that didn't happen. I think that's saying Ofwat hasn't seen it. So I don't know what happened after that. Maybe we could follow up. But I'm pretty sure that the business will have consulted local authorities about
just
the population
for the committee's record, the reservoir that was increased in size that work was done in 2013. So nothing really since
that was the Abertyn reservoir.
Yes, which had been in planning and thought for a considerable amount of time before that, but it was completed in 2015. Started in 2013 and completed in 2015.
Hence the need for the changes in planning. Hence the need for changes in planning.
It's a very slow process, so we're very supportive of that move because it needs to be done right, because there's quite a lot of environmental impact assessment done in that, and I think everybody would agree we'd want to do things properly, but it could definitely move quicker, and we would like to work collaboratively with you on that.
We've indulged ourselves here, but this is a very important area, but I do need to move on to questions surrounding your environmental performance. And Josh, I ask you please to lead off our questioning in this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that there's a slightly less rosy picture when we look at companies' environmental performance. So Northumbrian's not close to meeting its environmental performance targets, and unlike quite a few other water companies in the sector that are starting to make glacial progress, you experienced a 65% increase in pollution incidents in 23-24. And Ofwat said that they plan to fine you for your management of sewage overflows. So how has Northumbrian got to that point, and what are you doing to try and turn that situation around?
Okay, so you've picked on two separate subjects, so if it's okay if I answer those independently. So the first was around pollution incidents. So I think I'd begin by saying you're pointing to Category 3 pollutions, and that's an important one, but if it's okay, I'd like to remind the committee that as a company we haven't had any serious pollutions. That's Category 1 or 2 pollutions for quite a number of years. So I think that's evidence of good environmental stewardship. Category 3 pollutions, there is environmental harm, but not at the level of Category 1 or 2. So this is an area where we have been working incredibly hard. And if you looked further back in your data, you would see that our numbers were coming down significantly. And then in 2021, they've started to creep up again. Now, the Environment Agency made a change in their policy there, and that's within their gift to do. I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't, to put the onus on power supply to us. This is quite challenging, and you might have heard from some of the other companies in the north of England. As a very generalised point, the power supply in the north of England is typically held above ground on poles, and in the south it's typically underground. Okay, so we're having more storms, more wind, and this system is being interrupted. So a number of pollution events which would have been a result of those kinds of incidents, which previously the regulator would have said, as many other regulators say, bad weather is, if you like, put on one side, came to us. So we started to go up. Now, I'm not trying to say that shouldn't have happened or anything. I'm just saying that it is predominantly driven by that. So now we have to work out how to protect our assets against this variability of power and storms. And I'm sure you can appreciate that that is quite a difficult thing for us to do, but we are doing our damnedest to do this. And we will try very much to turn that tide back over, but it's power we're going to have to do something about. That's broadly driving that. There are a few other things, but it's broadly driving that. And then the second thing was about
sewage overflows.
Sewage overflows. So again, this is an area where I think it's very well understood in the country that what's caused this problem to increase over time. We're very, very keen to put this right and to work hard. So we have a big and very ambitious plan as part of AMP8 to work on that. But two very positive things I can share with you there. We do expect when the results are published for 2024, you'll see a reduction in Northumbrian water spills. So we're very pleased, even in a year that was wetter than the 3-year average, we've managed to get that number down with our work. And then we're just about to go live with a system which is going to use digital twins, artificial intelligence, and moving water around. It's a system that we have worked with some American partners on and it's been used in some American cities. The one that we've installed will be the largest in the world in Newcastle, and we expect that to drive things. So I think we're right, we're really on top of this. Our shareholders allowed us to bring forward some money into last year to start that work at their expense. So we're really pleased about that, which means that we've made greater progress. So I'm hopeful you'll start to see some very positive news from Northumbrian Water, not glacial, but moving forward. So.
Okay, so you referenced the weather and the impact that's having. In 2023, it was reported that you spilt raw sewage into waterways over 280,000 hours, which was double that of the year before. And obviously we're often told that heavy rainfall and the wetter weather we're seeing in general because of climate change is the cause of a lot of those overflows. But provisional data suggests that of your overflows that spilled more than 60 times, only 14.5% were due to exceptional rainfall. So to what extent do you think that underinvestment over a long period of time is actually behind that?
I think you're looking at some data which is possibly a bit inconsistent in the way that companies categorise that, because we chose to answer those questions differently. So you need to combine excess rainfall and hydraulic incapacity because different companies cause it differently. But in essence, that problem is largely being driven by climate change and more water into the system, which I think we recognise, which is why we've got the new plan that we're moving forward with, because we've undoubtedly got more water in the system than we used to have. It might be interesting, though, to know that we have done some really innovative work over quite a number of years in partnership with all the local authorities in the North East. So we established something called the Northumbrian Integrated Drainage Partnership. It started with 1 or 2 local authorities. It now has all the local authorities in the North East. It's independently chaired. And together we work on schemes where we're trying to remove surface water from that system, because that's largely the problem. But obviously in highly urbanised areas, it's not always easy to do that because the water has to go somewhere responsible, if you like. But we've done some fantastic schemes in Newcastle where we remodelled a golf course in partnership with the EA in order to allow a swale to be built to store a lot of water. That was the first scheme that we did. It won a lot of awards, and lots of people have seen that as a very good thing. And then subsequently we did something not dissimilar with a recreational lake that sat in the middle of a housing estate, where we were able to again make that lake a bit deeper to store some water. We found quite interestingly in the middle of all of that in building that housing estate back in the day, the local authority had diverted several rivers into the sewer, which wasn't particularly helpful. So we managed to get some of them out and into rivers. But this is really complex stuff because the water has to go somewhere responsible. We can't just block it up and allow it to go where it might otherwise go. So it's in urban areas very, very challenging, but that drainage partnership's got under quite a number of schemes on its books that together we've worked on that we want to deliver. And of course we put those things into our business plan, and we move forward, and I think that's a really good way of working.
You've mentioned quite a few new investments there. Previously, you've underspent your allowance for enhancement expenditure by 28%, which, to be fair, is similar to many water companies. But given your environmental performance, and you talked to us about the improvements you want to make around that, how do you justify that underspend? And are you looking to rectify that for the next 5-year period?
I think, and you want to come back in a minute, I can see, but you're going back quite a number of years, and in that particular block of time that you're looking at, we did all the work, we did it more efficiently than had been planned to do. So I think you can see that we were doing a really good thing. We've carried on, obviously, subsequent to that, spending the full allowances. So you're going back about 10 plus years there. But we've upped our expenditure and carried on moving forward to do more and more work, which is why, I think we're able, for example, with the smart sewer network in Newcastle, to use a lot of underground storage that we've invested in that same time frame. We can now use that much more actively than that it was previously being used for. So did you want to add something to that, Andrew?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look back over the last 25 years and you look at the capital maintenance allowances we've had, we've overspent those allowances by about £160 million. If you look at total expenditure, we've overspent that as well. And that's a company which, at the moment, Ofwat would say is the 4th most efficient water and sewage company based on the models they used in the last price review. So we're a pretty efficient company. Last year, Ofwat told us we were the best asset manager, and we've overspent those allowances. At the moment, we replace about 0.2% of our water mains and our wastewater mains a year, and that means we're expecting those pipes to last about 500 years, and that is almost double what the rest of the industry does as an average. So we're doing more than others, but as a whole, the industry is just not spending enough. The allowances are just insufficient, and that's why we're one of the reasons why we're making this case to the Competition and Markets Authority. It was really reassuring when we saw the Cunliffe Review call for evidence to see this issue very well positioned in that as an issue that we're considering. We think it's a very important issue, but I think fundamentally the issue is not underspending in one AMP versus another. It's the overall pot is just not big enough.
Okay. Final question I've got for you is around transparency. I think it's fair to say that Ofwat are quite hesitant in being robust with criticisms of water companies, and yet last August they found that Northumbrian lacked adequate and routine processes to monitor environmental impacts, and that you only took corrective steps in response to their investigations. Earlier last year, you had to be ordered to release data on sewage overflows from the pumping station at Whitburn. So why is it that it takes an investigation or a court order for you to release that information and take your environmental obligations seriously? Do you not owe your customers more transparency than that?
Well, I think so. You've got two separate things there. If I could answer both of those, but perhaps begin by saying we do put a lot of our information in the public domain. You'll be aware that there is an interactive daily map on spills that people can access. As a company, we lead an industry open data collaboration called Stream. We chair that, and that's put about 80 different data sets into the public domain. So I think we would say we've got a good record of being open, transparent. The first comment that you made is related to the draft notice that Ofwat issued last August in its investigation. We're not able to speak in this committee because Ofwat requires us to be confidential, but those conversations are going on, and we would not recognise the characterisation that they put there, and those issues have moved over time and are not concluded yet. The second one is related to we have a customer, two customers really, who came to us with a very, very big list of things that they wanted us to put into the public domain, some of which we do put in the public domain, some of which, but maybe not in quite the same way, some of which we don't collect, some of which we do collect. and it was quite an onerous package. So we had a conversation with the Information Commissioner about what would be the right response to this. The Information Commissioner considered some of those requests vexatious, but ultimately some of them, he said it wasn't unreasonable. And the actual one that I think you're referring to, that in the end we were asked to do, we are effectively inferring what might be happening in the network, because the customer is asking us for some information that we wouldn't routinely collect, either for our operations or for a regulator. But you could calculate what might be happening, but it's not necessarily accurate. It's not probably unreasonable, but that customer was particularly interested in that information, so we provide it, but it's inferred as opposed to being measured.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
I'm sorry, I'm really struggling to follow that.
Sorry, I'll try again.
The committee's been told that release of information, which I understand actually came from the first-tier tribunal, is that correct? It wasn't the information... The first-tier tribunal, not the Information Commissioner. Did you not have...
from the Information Commissioner.
I understood, well, wherever it came from, the data that was released in June 2024, as we have been told, tell us if we're wrong here, was that the Whitburn pumping station it discharged 1 million tonnes of raw sewage in 2023. Is that correct?
That's inferred. So this was the debate that was going on. So the Whitburn system, we provide a lot of regulatory...
So when you say it's inferred, is
yes.
that another way of saying you don't actually know?
We manage the system in a different way, using different information than specifically how that customer wanted it to see it.
So how much discharge did you think there was on the basis of the figures that you hold?
Not as high as that.
How much?
Would it be okay if I came back to you with the exact number? But it's not as high as that
Are
customer would have
we
inferred.
Tolerance of 5%, 10%, 50%?
Probably some... I don't want to guess, because I don't think that would be fair on the committee, but it's not 90-10. Yeah, but there is a difference.
So there is a difference. And how easy would it be, using the interactive maps and the rest of it that you've spoken about, for a customer to find the information that you think is the accurate figure?
So the currency that the country is using, if you like, the data that the country is using is typically spills numbers and spill duration. Okay, so that's what's on those maps. Any customer can see for any storm overflow, any day, when it last spilled and how long it spilled for. And we also publish that data in its entirety in a big file as well. So any customer can look at that in any time. What was going on in this debate was trying to decide how much water might have gone out, because of course sometimes it will be low or higher depending on what the rainfall is. So, but we are regulated on the number of spills and their duration. So that's the regulatory information that we're typically working with, and the whole country is trying, in the storm overflow reduction plan that we're now all working to bring the number of spills down.
In terms of what you're describing, though, you say you have a conversation with the Information Commissioner. I'm not hearing you talking about conversations with your customers.
Oh, we talk with the same customer as well. We've met with him many times, along with the local MP as well. He's very active in his interests, and of course he's every right to be so. So we will meet with the customer on quite a number of occasions.
Okay, again, don't really have time to dwell on this, but Ellie, did you want to come in at this point?
I'm just conscious of time, and we've moved on.
We will then, in that case, move on to look at questions of ownership, return to investors and executive pay. Andrew, can you lead the questioning, please?
Thank you. I'll try and be brief, mindful of time. Well, I hope you can understand why we're asking these questions, because around environmental performance and financial performance, these are big issues for our constituents and for the public, rightly so. And it does feel sometimes a bit like these discussions are a bit like play your cards right. You know, higher or lower, we have lots of imprecise information, And I think it frustrates the public as much as us that it's very hard to get precise answers. So I'm going to read a couple of statements out and just see how you respond to them in terms of that. So firstly, in 2022, Northumbrian paid out 105 million in dividends to its overseas owners, whilst spilling a not insignificant amount of raw sewage into the sea. In 2023, Northumbrian paid out £159 million in shareholder dividends, despite a £50 million pre-tax loss. Could you tell us how you respond to that and how dividends are justified, given this environmental performance?
Okay, so I think, again, if I could take it in two separate parts. So I think I would encourage you to look at the dividend profile across the 5 years, because there are also years in which we didn't pay a dividend. So we are looking at things in the round and over the long term. And we have a dividend policy which is very transparent and published, and anybody can look at it at any moment in time, that looks at how we make those decisions about what is appropriate and against the performance that we're delivering to our customers at the same time. So across the 5 years, you would see that we have a dividend yield of about 5.3%, which is in line with more or less with Ofwat expectations. So this is a regulated sector with regulated returns, and we're broadly in that scope with some ups and downs over the time. So when we're publishing those actual numbers, which are all very transparent, you can find them on our website, you'll also see the dialogue that sits behind that about why we think our performance is improving. And of course, we take our customers will tell us that the environment is important, but they will also tell us that customer service is important, clean, clear drinking water is important, and so the goals and targets that we've set our decisions against are wider, and we look at that performance in the round. And you might have sort of seen recently, you may come on to pay as well, but Ofwat has not typically in any of that period of time challenged against our dividend policy that we're following that correctly, or that, you know, the same with pay, that we're not making reasonable decisions, we're setting stretching targets in line with customer expectations, and we're matching up to them. So that's how I would answer your question. There are ups and downs, but over the period of time, about 5.3%, which is in line with regulatory expectations.
So it's long-term regulated as opposed to in-year performance that drive. So when we're seeing some of this environmental performance, your answer in a slightly less game show, more yes minister way of answering was, it's regulated, therefore that doesn't matter.
No.
At what point would your environmental performance matter in terms of the dividends you're paying?
Okay, so the dividend policy links the dividend paid to service performance delivered for customers directly. So we cannot pay a dividend in a circumstance where we were overspending materially against the allowance. We were getting big service performance penalties in the round, and we were having to raise finance at higher rates than had been allowed in the termination. It would be very difficult to pay a dividend. There would be a much lower value that would be certainly there'd be a much lower value that would be allowed under the policy. The reason why we've been able to pay a dividend at that level is because that service performance to customers has been met. So, for example, on the service performance area, we look at the ODI, Ofwat's outcome delivery incentive position. That is meant to reflect customer preferences in the valuation for those, and that then feeds through to the dividend. So there is a direct link. So if we had really bad service performance years in the round, then that would come off the dividend.
How does that relate then? What is the direct link in that answer to hundreds of thousands of litres of raw sewage being pumped out? Is the direct link the performance measure is so low that doesn't matter? Or is it the direct link isn't direct?
Okay, so the direct link is we look at service performance in the round, and that, to Heidi's point, includes environmental measures, but it also includes other measures like customer service, etc.
Let's be really specific. We've all talked about really, really significant sums of raw sewage. Now, we can say that's part of a basket of environmental measures. Does the amount of raw sewage that gets pumped out by yourselves as a company have a direct link to how you pay dividends?
I'd probably say no.
Do you understand why people are really angry in this country at big profitable companies like yourselves taking out huge dividends that can sit here and just say no to something which is of national significance?
Well, what I would say to that is that, as I've said, the dividend is directly linked to all the other service performance metrics that customers care about. That was set in the last time prices were set in 2020. And what I would also say is, to Heidi's earlier point, we're doing everything we can to try and improve performance in that area, including a lot of additional investment beyond what was allowed that's funded by shareholders. That does come off the dividend.
Well, can I ask Heidi, as Chief Executive, you've just heard a colleague on behalf of your company say, no, it doesn't matter, it's not taken into account. How comfortable are you looking us in our eyes and the public in saying it doesn't matter in our model how much sewage we pump out? That is an irrelevant factor to the amount of dividends we pay out.
I think what we're trying to say to you is that we've been taking all the service that we provide into account rather than one particular thing. And although I understand the strength of feeling around spills, if we ask customers what their most important thing is, then they typically tell us that it's the reliable provision of clean, clear drinking water, and customer service. So there are other things. So rightly or wrongly, we've been taking everything into account rather than say one criteria, everything goes. We think it's important to listen to all customers' views and to take it into account in the round. I think obviously over that time, the issue of sewage spills has become more prevalent. I would say prior to that, our more focus on this pressure on the sewage system was whether or not properties were flooded, and we've reduced that number by 70% in this corresponding time, which I think is a really positive thing. This is a system under pressure because of the rain. We went first to trying to fix it in properties and then started to look at it when it comes into rivers as well, which is also important. We're on a journey with this. That's why we've got more investment coming in the coming 5 years to work more on that, and why our shareholders said to us, get going on that on our expense early. So that's what we're doing. So I think, I'd like the committee to understand that we worked very, very hard to reduce flooding in properties. We then observed that pressure was still going on and water was coming out elsewhere. We started working on that, and we started working on that early. So we are very much on this journey and working very, very hard to get ahead of the game, because we do recognise the issue. But we also recognise other service provisions are important to customers as well, and it's important to listen to those and not just to say it's all about one thing, it's about all these things. We have to do all of these things, and I don't want to look at one and forget other ones, because that wouldn't be right, and you wouldn't want us to do that. We look at them all.
I do think complex organisations like yourselves can look at more than one metric at one time. So let me rephrase. Do you believe, personally as Chief Executive, from this day onwards, now you've said it's been recognised, the amount of sewage that you put out should be factored into dividends and your executive pay?
Well, because of our dividend policy going forward, that's absolutely how it will play.
Right. So why wasn't it not included in your?
Because we're transitioning from looking at a broader set of criteria to having that element in that criteria as well, because of the way that the public feel about it. That's absolutely right. But I still don't think it was wrong to have other service criteria in that decision-making process as well, because if we don't keep all of those things in balance, something else won't go right, and nobody wants that, right? So we can multitask, but we are giving greater weight now to that than we did previously because of the direction of travel that we've gone in. And as I said, I would have said going back 5, 6, 7 years, we were definitely focused on property protection first, then storm overflows. And I would still argue that property protection is really important.
So in November 2024, it was reported that Northumbrian water executives received £315,000 in bonuses, despite sitting on Ofwat's elevated concern watch list. Is that right?
So we've obviously, the chair asked us the question about elevated concern earlier on. I think we explained how we believe that the level at which we keep our gearing is sustainable for an infrastructure company. So I think we've probably touched on that. And our bonuses, we set very stretching targets. As I said right at the beginning, we are aiming to be industry leading. So Ofwat has commended us on more than one occasion that our targets are stretching, because we don't only set them at the regulatory level, we set them at higher than the regulatory level to push our people to be industry leading, and together as a team we're all moving in that direction and doing well. So our bonuses are linked to performing either at a regulatory level or better.
But not linked to the amount of sewage you're pumping out.
So the way that the system is, that our particular system is working, and I should remind I guess the committee that this is managed by an independent committee to the executive, so we don't manage this process. You'll find that very common in many companies. We have an independent remuneration committee. They have chosen the broad suite of indicators that they believe are indicative of what customers want the company to do. You can see this, it's incredibly transparent. As I said, Ofwat have looked at the ones and said, yes, they're aligned with what we believe customers want. They're a balanced scorecard, and the targets are set, stretching. We have to then meet them.
But move aside from the independent, you are personally comfortable with having a criteria for a bonus, which will be more, quite literally more than most people in this country earn in a year. You are comfortable with that not having any performance-related element around the amount of sewage you're pumping out?
So at the moment, and I think I've sort of explained the process that we've gone through, more weight would be given in that bonus to internal sewer flooding, because we believe that was the most important thing for us to focus on first. And we are, I think, the remuneration committee, but I'm not in control of this, and it's making these decisions, will transition to now going to spills. Because we've managed a 70% reduction.
That's an answer to a different question. The question I asked was whether you, as a senior British business leader, are comfortable receiving a bonus payment based on a criteria that does not reflect the environmental performance of sewage, which is one of the major products and anger points. You are personally, as an individual, comfortable with that not being a measure for your success in your bonus?
But it is a measure, because the environmental elements that are in our bonus take into account the performance of the sewer network, particularly in relation to the impact on properties. Okay, so it does. We have to manage the network such that we don't have impact on properties. And I think that is the right thing. And we also have a boundary for the environmental criteria that unless we get 3-star in the EPA assessment, which covers a whole range of environmental factors, we can't access that either. So we are focused on the management of the sewer network, particularly related to properties. And I think the remuneration committee, because we have managed to reduce that significantly, which I think we should all say is a really good thing, people are not suffering impacts into their homes, which nobody would want. We are now transitioning that to spills.
With respect, I think frustration is that you describe it like you're being successful on this, but the figures, you're taking record levels out in bonuses. I think last year, your total package, or 2022, your total package went up 11%, which I imagine is more than what your staff got in a pay deal, unless I would be wrong. I imagine not many people were getting 11% at that point. Whilst there's record levels of pollution, and your answer is the system's working fine.
No, I'm trying to explain why the system has been devised the way it is by the remuneration committee, and I think that there is some merit in that, because it's looking, the start point is, what do customers say is important to us? We have a lot of research about that. Is the executive group charged at meeting stretching targets for all of those things? So you can see this all written down, say Ofwat agrees with the list that we have and the fact that we set stretching targets. And there are things to do with the sewer network in there, albeit it was focused on customers' properties. And the reason that it's been going up is because we've been getting better at that. And I only get the pay award that the staff get, but the performance bonus, if we improve, could potentially make that look a bit bigger. But but I only ever get the same pay award as the staff.
That's right, like the total package was 11%.
Yeah, because the
increase.
performance bonus is increasing, but my base pay only increases by the same as the employees' base pay increases.
I fear we've probably got as much out of this as we are going to get today, although clearly some questions would remain. Heidi, Andrew, can I thank you for your attendance this morning? As you know, this is part of an ongoing inquiry. We will return to it with some of your colleagues, immediately in fact. But in the meantime, I thank you for your attendance and for your participation today.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If we can move to the next panel without suspending, I will do that.
With my inner Helena then.
Do it again. Do it again.
I don't know anything about water.
Good morning, and apologies for having kept you. Just sometimes how it works. The previous panel required a little more interrogation. Can I welcome you to the Select Committee? Peter, Samantha, just for the benefit of those who are following our proceedings and for our own official record, can I ask you to invite yourself, to introduce yourselves and explain your role in Welsh Water?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Samantha James. I'm the Interim Chief Financial Officer for Welsh Water.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning, Peter Parry. I'm Chief Executive Officer at Cymru, Welsh Water.
Okay. Luke, as you know, we've been hearing evidence from a number of the other companies in your sector. Can I just ask you, as I have asked others, to give us a thumbnail of how you see your business operating? What's important to you? Financial performance, environmental performance, transparency, customer engagement. What is the culture that you seek to foster within Welsh Water in the execution of your duties?
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to address you today. From the board through the whole organisation, our approach is very much one of a public service ethos. If I had my water treatment colleagues alongside us, it's one of public health. And if I had my colleagues from our environmental business, our wastewater business, it would be very much around protecting the great environment we have in our operating area. I think in terms of openness and transparency, the glass model, the not-for-shareholder model, has emphasised that from day one. And I think sometimes in things that we've done, a good example to bring this to life is the issues we had with leakage reporting. That was something that we found ourselves and something we immediately went to our regulators with. We've done this on numerous occasions, and we try to make sure that openness and transparency runs from the board right through the whole organisation. In terms of our people, we've just had our 2024 employee engagement survey that scored 75%, and I would pay tribute to our people because they deliver service for us on a day-to-day basis. But that whole emphasis is on openness, transparency. We know we were off the pace and some of our performance isn't where it should be, but it's one of always remembering, despite winds and weathers, and we see a fair bit of that in our operating area on the western side of the UK, it's a public service ethos. Of course, we run the business as a commercial entity. We have to do that. We have to behave in a responsible way. But I think overarching that is one of service and one of trust. Our vision for the company is to earn the trust of our customers every day. We were pleased, although we've got some of our measures not where they should be. In the Consumer Council survey for trust of companies, we came out first in 2024. We've always been in the first 1 to 3 positions. And also in the Ofwat customer satisfaction measure, we've tended to be in the top 4 companies. So again, I think that ethos of the business runs through the whole organisation.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to look first of all at the company's environmental performance. Henry, can I ask you to lead the question here?
Thank you, Chair. So you've touched about the environmental performance being one of your key metrics and real importance to Welsh Water as a company. It's been reported that there's an increasing amount of pollution incidents over the last 4 years. I think in the last reporting year there were 7 serious pollution incidents, and you were rated by NRW with 2 out of 4 stars, and they said it's one of the worst performance to date. So what's going wrong, and why is there such a difference between what you just set out there and the reality on the ground?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the first thing I'd say, we're absolutely disappointed with our environmental performance. We're not comfortable at all where we are, and we are doing something about it. In terms of the drop, we were 4-star back in 2020, and we've dropped down to 2-star, 3-star, then to 2. The way that assessment is pulled together, it allows a certain number of pollution incidents. This is the environmental performance assessment, and in the last couple of years, if you look at the serious incidents, category 1 and 2, half of those are actually linked to a number of strategic assets which we're due to replace in the new AMP period, which starts in April. So where we've had serious incidents, a very clear investment plan. Those incidents, to bring this to life, about half of that 7, 2 or 3 of them certainly occurred on something we call the southeastern coastal main. This is a pumping sewer from Chepstow to Newport. That runs through a triple SI, which I'm sure you understand what that is. If we get a leak on that sewer, it doesn't have to cause any environmental harm for it to be categorised as a serious incident. And we haven't had thankfully, any fish kill incidents on that particular asset. So that's the one aspect of it. So we've got investment to tackle that, to pull pollutions back. The other element is the things we're doing operationally. We're now in the process of developing. We've got great monitor coverage. We've got all our overflows are monitored, about just under 100%. We're putting artificial intelligence into our wastewater network through something called Storm Harvester. That's being deployed at a significant rate at the moment so that we can actually get ahead of blockages and get ahead of pollution incidents. I'm not going to miss the opportunity, if I may, to ask parliamentarians to do all you can to ban plastic wet wipes, because somewhere in the order of around 80% of our first-time pollutions on the sewerage network are linked to wet wipes. So what I'd say in response to you is uncomfortable with where our performance is, a clear plan in respect of category 1 and 2 pollution incidents, much of which is linked to future investment, but in general, in terms of wider, less serious pollution incidents, deploying operational strategies to get on top of that.
I'd like to just touch upon, thank you for that answer, I'd like to touch upon the sewer overflows and the spills per storm overflow. And it gets quite complicated because in terms of the measurements that NRW provide are different in respect of the industry, so the figures are different to compare. Yes. And you can correct me if these figures are wrong. So I've got 53.5 spills per storm overflow, which if you compare that to the sector average in England, that's 33.1. I hate doing these comparisons with England, but I think it helps for the present purposes. The average spill duration was 8.6 hours, but the average in England was 7.8. And then if you look at all storm overflows in Wales, and I appreciate there's difference in respect to that, but 19%, so 382 spilled between 100 and 299 times, and less than 1% spilled more than 300 times. But if you then compare that to the average in respect to the industry, it's 7.4% in terms of over 100. So there's quite a big discrepancy there, and I was wondering whether you could explain that to the committee.
Yeah, sure. This is something we're disappointed in and not comfortable in. But I do have to set out, I think, that the approach to storm overflows in Wales is very different to England, and it's different in terms of improvement. You will hopefully know that river quality in Wales is, if you measure it under the EU European Wastewater Directive, is better than it is in England. So the focus that we have in Wales through government, through our regulator in Natural Resources Wales, is to focus on harm reduction, not on spill numbers. If I try and explain our infrastructure, We have 825 wastewater treatment works, sewage works. Over 750 of those actually serve communities of less than 1,000 population. So when you talk of overflows in Wales, these are very often less than 4-inch or 100mm diameter pipes. And because of the sparsity of our population, we have more CSOs per kilometre of sewer than probably any other water company or utility in England, Wales, if you wanted to compare it. So I think tackling CSOs in Wales, this is a pretty challenging one for us to explain to our customers. It's a challenging one for us to explain more generally, but we are tackling harm. And the reason we're tackling harm is that if we went for a spill number reduction per se, we would not see the improvement in ecological harm in rivers. So as I say, we are in a very different comparative space to what's happening in England. Our AMP8 investment is £1 billion, the biggest CSO programme we have ever seen, and those improvements will be made to improve river quality and not reduce spills. Now, if there was a government policy in Wales and a regulator policy to go after spill reduction, then of course we would follow that. But our AMP8 plan is focused on river quality improvement, and because we've got that advantage of rivers in Wales being of a higher quality, we want to continue that. And that's been the sort of thoughtful process led by Welsh Government that we followed with our investment. But it is a difficult one, I absolutely get it. Trying to explain that our focus is on quality and not on spills. Very often spills occur when rivers are in full spate. The other thing I'd mention in Wales about CSOs is two other things. Number one, it rains a lot, and I'm sure you'll have experienced that. And we've got about a 60% combined drainage system in Wales, which is one of the highest levels where you have foul water and surface water connected. So hopefully that gives you the background to why the numbers are very different.
Well, the problem that I sort of am struggling to understand is that you're regulated by Ofwat, right? And you submitted to Ofwat, you asked for a bespoke harm reduction, right? So every other water company that's come in here is also regulated by Ofwat, but they didn't allow you to use that because you didn't provide compelling evidence as to how that would lead to additional benefits for customers and the environment beyond the commons spills performance commitment.
Yes.
So there's a sort of disconnect there, isn't there, between what you're setting out in respect of, we're slightly different in terms of, we sit within Wales and we have a different structure there. But the reality is that you're regulated by Ofwat. Ofwat are asking you to reduce your spills, and you seem to not be providing them with a coherent strategy about how to do that.
We agreed a spills number with Ofwat, which is 30 by 2030. Last year in 2024, we're at 47, so we've got a challenging reduction. We also have to look at reducing spills through operational means, through our maintenance, and that is an area that we need to improve. So I think overarching, we've got a Welsh Government policy on harm reduction, but we absolutely recognise that Ofwat are right in saying that we need a spills reduction target, and moving from 47 currently to 30, bearing in mind those other factors I've mentioned about the infrastructure, the weather, the inherited infrastructure we have, that is quite a challenging number reduction from 47 to 30 over the next 5 years.
So I'd like to go into some specific instances. So the Cleddau project, which operates in my constituency in Pembrokeshire, demonstrated that at Picton in Haverfordwest, they're running at 80% capacity. So that's 56,000 cubic metres. So that's 17 tankers a day, which should be going to a sewage treatment plant, were instead going into a special conservation area in the Cleddau. Would you like to apologise to the residents of Haverfordwest for this happening?
Absolutely, and it won't be the first time we've apologised either. We've done that locally with river groups in that part of Pembrokeshire. Can I say with Picton, which is a sewerage pumping station, again, coming back to the culture of the organisation, this was an issue that we discovered. We self-reported that to Natural Resources Wales. We agreed a programme, a timescale to get that fixed, and we did that in line, well, just ahead of the programme we agreed. But absolutely, I think the whole idea of the sewerage network, and I think this is not just the case for Dŵr Cymru, is that we are increasing the amount of monitoring we have on the system. Traditionally, there hasn't been mass coverage of our treatment works and our pumping stations. We're now working through that to get the best level of monitoring we can. And wherever we discover something proactively, we don't conceal that, we openly report it. And that's what we did at Picton. But again, I do apologise. We are sorry for what happened in that instance. It took us a while to fix it because the equipment we needed was specialist. We had to import it. We didn't fix that as quickly as we would have liked. And again, I'd re-emphasise the fact that we self-reported, and that is the way we will always conduct ourselves in these circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you say it took you a while, but to be clear, it took you between July 22 and February 24. So that, and what steps are you taking to restore the environmental damage that's taken place?
Well, that pumping station is now working within its allowed permits, so we've had no problem since we've fixed it. And on the Cleddau more generally, we're investing £60 million in the next investment period between 25 and 30. And in terms of the most significant pollution issues on the Cleddau, you'll probably know this, it's nutrient pollution. And by 2030, we will have reduced 90% of our phosphate load on the Cleddau, as we are going to do on all the special conservation rivers across Wales.
So are you confident that you're not going to see an incident like this happen again?
We've improved our monitoring. We've certainly at Picton, we've dealt with that. If I go through the other main assets in that area, we've done the same. So we are now putting much more emphasis on, are we delivering what we call full pass-forward flow? And that is now a weekly review for the organisation. So absolutely, yes. Yeah.
So yes, you're confident this kind of incident won't happen again?
Yeah. With 36,000 kilometres of sewers, 800 sewage works, there will always be an emergency of some form. But in terms of the things we can do proactively, I don't think we've ever been in such a continuous improvement place as we are now. So we'll do all we can, barring, let's call it an emergency that we can't foresee.
I'm conscious of time, but I just want to say there's the reporting from the Y, I want to detail some other specific instances. So in the Y in 2023, it was estimated, and this, to give you credit where credit's due, this is reporting from your organisation yourself. So 23% of phosphorus in the Y come from your own wastewater treatment works. And in October 23, you admitted to illegally spilling untreated sewage at dozens of treatment plants of several years. In respect of, and then there's been extensive work done by the Windrush against sewage pollution. I was wondering, do you think that this is a pattern in terms of these events?
What I would say is, if I can split those two issues out, certainly on the River Wye, an iconic river in our operating area, in the last 5 years, we've invested over £18 million to reduce our phosphate load. In terms of the partnership approach that we try and operate within the company with other sectors, we've funded free of charge pollution source modelling on all the special conservation rivers in Wales, including the Wye. We've shared that. That was independently verified, so this isn't us saying that these figures are produced by us. What I would say on the Wye is we've brought forward investment that would be delivered, should have started this year. We delivered last year, a year ahead of schedule, £80 million worth in total. And if you look at the impact of pollution on the Wye, it comes from nutrient pollution, not from storm overflows. But again, I'm going to go back to my original answer on storm overflows and say to you, we are very conscious that we have a high number of CSO spills when you compare it to England. But again, I come back to that policy of tackling pollution in agreement with our government and our regulators.
And I've talked about the Cleddau project. I've mentioned the Windrush against sewage pollution campaign and the work that they've done. I was wondering whether you want to take the opportunity to commend them for their work and their extensive continuing work in order to improve the water quality right across Wales.
Absolutely. To give you some idea of that openness that I touched on at the beginning, we're working with over 30 citizen science groups. I think the Windrush group are credible. They've certainly produced information. They highlighted the issues we had down at Cardigan back in 2023, and we have no truck with the information they put forward. We welcome that information because if it allows us to improve what we're doing, then we're open in that sense of using credible data to make things better.
And I've got two final questions.
Right, take your time.
One is about transparency. So you said at the beginning to the chair that transparency was incredibly important. But I mean, very recently in December 24, it's reported that you were facing a large fine for not properly monitoring discharges from sewage and water treatment works. And NRW, which is Natural Resources Wales, that you've committed the offence at 300 sites across Wales, which would lead to significant financial penalties. I was wondering whether you could comment on those.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something we regret and we're concerned about. To give some perspective on this goes back to COVID. And what happened during COVID, we undertake something called operator self-monitoring, where we monitor our sewage works and we pass those results on to NRW. What happened in 2020-21 with the impact of COVID, we missed about 1% 1 to 2% of the samples that we should have taken, and that's what that relates to. So again, since then, within 6 months of knowing we had those problems, we've recruited more people. We've now got that operator self-monitoring right up to literally 100% coverage. So we put our hands up. It was a mistake we made. It was at a very, very difficult time, as people will recall, during COVID. That's now been remedied.
And you've touched about customer satisfaction and how important that is. I appreciate in terms of when you compare it with your competitors, you are a positive level. But the point that is quite concerning is the score's declining. And I was wondering whether you thought that was in relation to your environmental performance and that was affecting your customers' satisfaction.
I think potentially. I think there is much more focus these days on the environment, and that's right, and we welcome it. And I think as we try and operate as transparently and openly as we can, there is much more information in the public domain, and that probably is the case. There will be some specifics. There will be some other areas of dissatisfaction, things like the supply interruptions or where people receive poor service. So I don't think it's entirely down to the environment, but I think the environment will play a part in that. I agree.
There's one bit that I missed out in my questioning, so if you forgive me. In terms of the Cardigan plant spill that we talked about in terms of the Windrush against sewage, the time, the number of days is something like 1,146 days from the start of 2018 to 2023. If you could just cover this off, why was that allowed to go on for so long?
I think I can't speak on behalf of Natural Resources Wales, but I do know through dialogue with their senior team, we would agree that if we were faced with something like Cardigan again, we would have tried to have condensed that timescale. What we did, the reason we had that timescale, we applied the regulatory process at the time, and that was because what we found at Cardigan, which is a coastal town, Cardigan Bay in West Wales, is at the treatment works we were having saline intrusion from the seawater into the treatment works. That was affecting the treatment process. We have a membrane plant there which we rely on bacteria, and the saline water getting back into the treatment works was killing the bacteria. We weren't getting the treatment, and we were spilling more. So what happened was the regulatory process determines that the first thing you do, you try to go through a process of fixing that problem. So the first thing we did, we tried to stop the saline intrusion coming in. So we tried to seal sewers in and around Cardigan. That didn't work. So the next thing we did was we tried to fix the treatment process by applying increased levels of maintenance to the plant. And that worked for a short while, but ultimately we have to rebuild that plant. And I'm glad to say that in December we were granted planning permission, and we're now investing 20 million to fully upgrade Cardigan sewage works. So the time delay, when you look in from the outside, seems excessive. But what we did during that process, excuse me, is work through the regulatory process, which is try and fix the problem. You have to do that from an economic basis. You have to prove that what you're doing is the most cost-effective way of trying to fix it. We did that. We followed process. It didn't work. We've had to rebuild the works. That's what's taken the time.
Why didn't you do that before that it took place? Why wasn't there a more proactive approach?
Well, it was all the way through that time. We were trying to
before 2018, before the spill took place. Why wasn't there a more proactive approach in order to prevent that from happening in the first place?
We self-reported this when we found it, and then we agreed a timescale with Natural Resources Wales to fix it. That's how it works. So this is an engineering sort of construction job that took time. So I think, unless I'm misinterpreting what you're saying.
Fine, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for indulging me, Chair.
So I'm here to do that. Ellie, do you want to... We should welcome you to the committee, first of all, guesting today from the Environmental Audit Committee.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and it's good to be here. And I should also declare an interest as Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Water Pollution. I think we're segueing quite nicely into my questions, which are around, asset health, resilience, impacts on customers, investment, and so forth. So, Welsh Water is meeting some targets in relation to, assets, for example, on asset outages, but it's not meeting targets relating to mains repairs. And customers are experiencing some of the worst rates of supply interruptions in the whole sector. So can you explain, please, Mr. Perry, what explains this variability in performance?
Sure. Thank you. And again, I'd apologise to our customers who do suffer supply interruptions, because you're absolutely right. We're at the wrong end of the league table, and we're doing all we can to try and turn that around. One of the issues that heavily influences our supply interruptions are assets in West Wales and in part in the north, which are essentially got to a place where we've seen them deteriorate in the last few years, and we've now got an investment plan from April this year to 2030 to address them. Basically, what we've got is, if you combine West Wales in terms of our total customer minutes lost, they account for 50% of our mains bursts and nearly 50% of our unplanned interruptions. So these are on assets that need replacing. We've done quite a bit down there to control pressure, because we have high pressures in Wales due to the topography. But this is broadly an asset replacement issue. I would say we are also doing as much as we can. The water network traditionally, historically, has better monitoring. So clever things like pressure management, the idea that we have data loggers that tell us when we've got a suspected leak, we'll continue to deploy those sort of issues. But by and large, it's that. And then, more latterly, in January this year, we had a major supply interruption in North Wales at our Bryncowdyd treatment works, which affected just short of 80,000 properties. And again, I would apologise to our customers for that. That was a catastrophic burst on a pumping main. It was something that we've carried out a very thorough investigation. That pipeline burst in an emergency situation. We picked up, through monitoring, a change in operating pressures and flows. But when you're dealing with 170 metres head of pressure on a pumping main, that main burst instantaneously. So again, with hindsight, you could say, why didn't we have two mains? Why were you reliant on one? That main has no burst history. And if you think with the available funding that we have, we apply that in terms of supply interruptions to places where we can see a deterioration and risk. And we didn't see that at Bryncowdyd. But I entirely accept your point that we are off the pace in terms of supply interruptions. We're expending every effort, whether it's going to be investment, technological use. In the worst served areas, we also have essentially repair teams round the clock with water tankers waiting for burst mains, and we're getting to them faster, but much more for us to do in this space, and we're not in a good position. Fully accept that.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to ask about the Conway incident because obviously it was, disastrous for the households and businesses affected. I mean, you were saying this was a kind of not one of the ones that you were expecting to burst, which in a way is even more worrying, right? Because you're putting in place presumably contingencies for things where you know that the infrastructure is a little bit flaky. Yes. But if you can get such catastrophic incidents as this, that perhaps widens the scope of what you need to be preparing for. And so on the question of kind of responding to unexpected catastrophic incidents like that, what lessons have you learned in terms of response?
Yeah, there's a range of lessons that we've learned, and from the Bryncalded incident in Conway, what we've now done is reassess all our risk assessments of what we call single pipelines in those circumstances, so where they cross rivers, where they cross railways, where they cross major roads. What happened with Conway is the pipe failed in the bed of the river. If we were building that pipeline today, not back in the early 90s, we would never have constructed it. So our asset standards have been improved from what they were at the time that pipeline was in place. What we're now doing is assessing particularly ones where that river, due to river flows, that the embankment has moved, the river flows have changed. We are currently going through a process of re-evaluating similar circumstances, and we will reassess our prioritisation. We've got around 10 million of investment planned for those strategic crossings in the next period. We'll now apply the lessons learned from Bryncalded, but that was very much an asset build issue. It was the specification at the time was nowhere near what we would build today, and there was probably some workmanship issues as well in terms of the way that pipeline was constructed.
Okay, thanks. I want to come back to the capital investment point in a minute, but just in returning to the issue of the response to the incident, I understand that there were some households without access to drinking water for several days. You've offered some compensation. Is that, I think, 30 quid per household affected per 12 hours, 75 for businesses? Do you consider that that is appropriate? What lessons have you learned in terms of speed of response and indeed ensuring that people are able to access clean water as quickly as possible in an incident like this?
Yep. Again, absolutely apologise to our customers. To have lost water for a number of days is something it shouldn't happen, and we very much regret that. What I'd say in terms of compensation for domestic customers, for those worst affected, the level of compensation at £30 per 12 hours will actually mean that their water charges for 2023-24 will be written off. So we will more than compensate for their whole year's charges. For businesses, £75 is the guaranteed standard. What we've now done, and I'll draw Sam in on this in a second, we've worked through all the business claims, and we're actually paying their loss of profit. So the £75 was purely a guaranteed standard. The actual compensation was much more significant.
I think you've covered it perfectly well, Pete. As Pete explained, we have a process for business to do when they can demonstrate loss of earnings, that we will compensate them for that. And we've had that with other incidents as well.
Okay, great. Understood. Thank you. Moving on to drinking water discoloration. Welsh Water's got twice the level of the industry average in terms of complaints about discoloration. How are you tackling the problems that cause these complaints, and what are you doing?
Again, if you understand our infrastructure a bit, and I'll come on to the solution, but it's worth having this very brief background. We've got about 28,000 kilometres of water mains, and broadly around 10,000 of those are actually cast iron. And those mains are historically, if you combine that with our soft water, that's where the problem comes from. What we're doing in the AMP8 period from April 25 to March 2030 is investing significantly in the root cause of that discoloration. So there's around 20 to 25 million going into water treatment works where we have naturally occurring manganese, which gets into the mains and causes discoloration. Now we're looking to get to just over 1 by 2030 from the 2 we're currently at, and we've got investment based on either root cause treatment, removal at treatment, or mains replacement. We will be replacing over 600 kilometres of mains in the next 5 years. In part, that'll be targeted at water quality improvements to reduce discoloration and also going back to your supply interruption point. We will try and maximise the benefit of that investment to get the best return we can on both of those failing areas.
Thank you. So what's your replacement rate currently? What are you expecting it to be in 5 years' time?
It's broadly just over 1%,
right.
And it'll move to just over 3%.
Just over 3%. Okay.
Yeah.
That's significant. And yet, I understand you are underspending your allowances for enhancement expenditure.
Yeah, we'll. Currently, there are reasons for that. I'll draw Samantha in a second, but just to set the scene on that, historically we spend up and over. So in terms of our base maintenance, we've actually spent over. On enhancement, we are short of where we should be in AMP7, but we'll be making that up. But let me hand over to Samantha.
Yeah, we are overspending on our total allowances, but a lot of that is our base maintenance spend. So things like the COVID pandemic, the additional costs we had there, we had increased cost of power, and there's been the cost of addressing leakage. So we're over on our base maintenance, but as you say, our enhancement. So that's what we're investing. We are some way short, predominantly in the water sector, the water element of our investment plan. That again, we had some impact of COVID where programmes have been delayed. And we've experienced other delays not related to COVID. What I will say is that those schemes will move into the next AMP period. Most of them are on track to complete by the end of the first year. So they will be delivered, but we recognise that we have been underspending this AMP.
And isn't there a bit of a chicken and egg problem if you're not investing in the kind of the renewal of the infrastructure? You're going to have to be spending more on ongoing maintenance. So why have you allowed yourselves to get into that situation?
Please.
I wouldn't say it's a question of allowing. There have been circumstances when you have a significant investment programme. We're spending over £1 million a day in investing in our assets. Things will happen where you have to make changes to schemes, and we have experienced that. And we also would recognise that first year of the AMP, we were significantly impacted by the lockdown restrictions with COVID with a number of our schemes.
Can I just add as well? One of the things that happens when we evaluate our investment, whether it's in mains or whether it's in treatment works, we want to make sure we're getting best value. And a couple of the schemes on enhancement that we're actually delaying only by a year, so we will make that investment. It's not as if we won't spend the money, is because the desktop type analysis we did when we put the original investment plan has been improved. And that investment we're now changing so that we get best value when we actually carry that investment out in year one. So the delays are not to avoid the spend, it's almost to make sure that the investment gives us a best return. Yeah.
Briefly, one final question. Recognising the impact of climate change on the environment in which you work, and certainly I see it face up in my constituency of North Herefordshire all the time in terms of flood resilience. Can you just talk a bit about how you are taking into account the increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather incidents, how that's affecting your choices about investment in infrastructure and in particular managing flooding?
Yeah, there's a number of areas. First of all, what I'd say is for a couple of investment periods now, what we've done is actually assessed all our assets in terms of their criticality, and that's what we're focusing on. So the areas which, if they were flooded, for example, would mean mass outages of water or an environmental impact. We're working through a programme that targets, I think it's well over 150 to 200 million in the next period to essentially remove that flood risk. We're either hardening assets, but what we're finding is we can't engineer our way out of this. The scale of some of these challenges is so big. And a good example, you'll remember potentially Storm Callum, which hit about 2 or 3 years ago. That hit our mid and West Wales area the worst. And we lost, during that period, around 50 wastewater treatment works were completely flooded. We will never harden them. So what we do, we're good now, and I think one of our strategies is actually fixing them after they've flooded. And what do we do? A good one in your constituency at Whitbourne, for example, the water treatment works there, we carry critical spares because we know we can't build flood defences high enough to stop the team flooding that site. So a combination of hardening where it's appropriate by flood defences, but also storage of critical spares that we could fix plants quickly. And that's probably going to be one of our main climate change responses, because we will not be able to build flood defences big enough to stop some of these assets getting out of operation. Yeah.
Thank you, Ellie. We're going to move on or back to water security. Henry.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a few questions around water security, and if we build on this point of resilience, particularly around the drought in 2022, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that about 3% of your infrastructure captures the rainfall. And I was wondering what you learned about the resilience of Welsh water in 2022 with that drought, and how it has affected your water security strategy.
Sure. Again, back in 2022, one of the worst droughts in living memory, we had around 60,000 properties, predominantly in Pembrokeshire, which were affected from our Lysafran reservoir. Just to reassure you, what happened there was this was unlikely to have been a loss of water supply to customers, but it was due to we put the restrictions in for a number of months to protect the environment. So I just wanted to be clear on that, so you have that background. What we've done subsequently there is rebuild our main pumping station, so it takes water much more effectively from the Cleddau. So we've dealt with the issues at Lysafran. We could deal with another 2022 situation in that part of the world should it ever occur, and I'm sure it will at some time in the future. More broadly in Wales, if I go back to one of my starting comments, we do have a lot of rainfall, and we don't have a long-term supply issue. And what I mean by that is, will we need to build new reservoirs in Wales? Very, very unlikely. So what we have to do is manage demand, and we manage demand through leakage reduction, and we manage it through other things like there's likely to be a significant increase in customer metering in the next period. So for us in Wales, we've got a 25-year water resource management plan. No requirements to build new sources, but there is definitely a requirement for us to reduce our leakage, and there is other ways through smart water metering that we will reduce demand. So that's where we are with supply.
On that leakage point, it's risen by 15% since 2019, which I think is one of the worst performers in the industry.
Yes.
What steps are you going to be taking in order to get that back on track?
Yeah, considerable. And again, I touched on this a bit earlier, but we discovered a problem with our leakage calculation through our second line audit. We reported that to Ofwat, and what we've done subsequently is do all we can to get back to a level of leakage which, number one, complies with the rules on how you account for it. What we did at the time, we've spent over in the last 2 years an extra 150 million on leakage. And what we're doing is trying to get to a point where our leakage matches the targets now set by Ofwat. In the last year alone, we've reduced leakage by about 20 megalitres, which is a pretty significant amount in that period. We're unlikely to hit the leakage target for 24-25, but we have plans in place through pipe renewal, new assets that I talked about quite a bit earlier on, and all the clever stuff around managing pressure, more monitoring, getting to leaks faster, fixing leaks on private supplies. All those things are in our future plan.
You've mentioned Ofwat, and I'm glad you have, because in December last year, the chief executive of Ofwat, who's given evidence before this committee, said that it was indefensible that for 5 years you misled customers and regulators on your record for tackling leakage and saving water. And you've talked about transparency to this committee. You've set out how important it is. So to what extent do you agree with that assessment from Ofwat?
What happened with our leakage calculation, we hugely regret. But if I can take you back to the fact that we found that wasn't something that was discovered by a regulator. It wasn't covered up. as soon as we became aware through our second line auditing, through our own procedures, we immediately, within a day or so, reported that to Ofwat. So the transparency is in many ways, we regret the fact that we underreported leakage, but as soon as we became aware of it, we did something about it. I can't turn the clock back and say, we wish we'd, if I could turn the clock back, I wish we'd found it sooner. But the second we did find it, we reported it, and we've made amends since by, first of all, compensating customers. We reduced bills, and what we also did then is put significant levels, over £100 million, into reducing leakage.
And finally, on this water security point, there's been an increase in water consumption by over 3% when you compare that to the baseline. To what extent do you take responsibility for that?
In terms of, you mean?
In terms of there's a 3-year average target in for 23-24 was 130 litres per head per day.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
And yeah.
Sorry, I know what you're saying. Again, per capita consumption by customers is pretty difficult to control, because ultimately it's what customers use in terms of water. I think what we've seen since...
But there's a big discrepancy, right, between the target and what you're actually achieving?
Yes.
As well.
I'll try to explain that. This is the amount of water people actually use. What we've seen since COVID with home working, we've seen water consumption increase because of habits that have changed with that working practice. The other kind of thing we're doing is we run a number of national campaigns to promote water efficiency. We carry out free of charge water efficiency surveys, but ultimately it is down to the amount of water people ultimately choose to use. So it's probably one of the most difficult measures for us to control, because it's down to people's individual use of water habits.
Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. And finally, we're going to move on to some questions around a subject of your ownership, financial performance and executive pay. Andrew, you can...
Brilliant. Well, look, I've just got a couple of questions for you. I think I might pass the baton back to our Welsh colleague as well at some point, to be nice to him. Thank you for, I think, the candour and the level of detail you've given us. I'm going to ask you a couple of things and hope you get the same level of candour in terms of the challenge you're facing. I suppose my first question is, Welsh Water's financial performance at least seems to be better than many of the other water companies we've seen. I'm really interested if you think, is there anything in the DNA of you being a not-for-profit model that we could learn from?
I take it you're talking about our gearing level of 60%. It goes back to the formation of Glass Cymru, and at the time you go back to 2001, where the former Welsh Water business was on the brink of collapse, and the model was set up to effectively focus on driving best value for customers, better service for customers, and keeping down the cost of financing through raising debt. And what we've done is try to build our reserves in the organisation since then. So whereas you could think of this a bit like a mortgage on a house. It's a very simplistic analogy, but it does fit the bill. You could, as your house grows in value, borrow more against it. And at some point you've got to pay on that increased borrowing. What we've done is, as the value of our house has gone up, we've tried to keep our borrowing as low as possible by keeping, effectively, money in the business. That's a model that has worked for us. It's helped us to brave some considerable financial headwinds over the last 20 years. It's helped us fund investment in social tariffs and also respond to additional investments which haven't been funded through the allowed price controls.
Brilliant, thank you. So, look, Welsh Water was penalised under the outcome delivery, I was trouble saying it, so I had to write it out, outcome delivery incentive. I always want to say Olympic Delivery Agency, but that'd be a different thing for you. In terms of outcome delivery incentive, leading to a loss in revenues and contributing to a negative return on some of your regulated equity. Can you tell us a bit about the impact this has on your ability to deliver services, improve the environmental outcomes we talked about, and service your overall debt levels?
When we planned for each 5 years as they come up, we are very prudent in the way we do that planning. So we anticipate a certain level of ODI penalty. We think it would be imprudent to assume that we will get an incentive because it's actually built for the majority of companies to pay a penalty. So by planning that carefully and then planning the cost of our operations, it hasn't been to the, and I said I'd talk about the strength of the model allowing us to withstand some financial headwinds. It allows us to withstand a certain level of ODI payment, which we've been able to manage well within our plan.
Can I just add, though, as well, that if you think of many of those performance improvements, they are tied into regulatory commitments we have in the investment plan, so we don't miss those.
No.
So if there are targets set that we have to deliver, schemes that have been set by the Drinking Water Inspectorate, by Natural Resources Wales, or by Ofwat, then we will have to deliver those. So there isn't a linear link between the penalties and reduced service.
Thank you. And you, sorry, forgive me, as representing a Midlands seat in England, does Natural Resource Wales and the Welsh Government give you a greater level of scrutiny than perhaps companies on this side of the border would face?
It's an additional level, I would say. We attend committees here in Westminster, but the Senedd has committees as well, and the predominant one there, it's badged up as the Climate Change Committee, but only last week we were there talking about our response to the storms Dara and storms Bert. So what I would say is that for us there is an additional level of scrutiny through the Senedd, but because we're regulated through England and Wales, then we probably have two levels to deal with.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really interested in that, because we often have conversations about how do we get more granular scrutiny, and in Anglian Water, which is my company, we don't have a similar devolved, we shouldn't particularly have a devolved structure in this, because we don't have the identity that Wales has to do that. So thank you on that. So one other question for me, which is really around the Moody's and them downrating your credit rating. There's a curious thing that we've noticed as a committee I'd like to get your comments on, which was taking a look at some of the Moody's writing. They noticed that, what's the phrase, Welsh Water would, at one point Welsh Water is going to accrue 62 million of ODI rewards if it delivers your leakage package forecast, compared to what had previously been £112 million penalty in the intermediate determination. So I think we're really interested in why are you now being financially rewarded performance when you previously would have incurred a penalty? What's the change from 112 bad to potentially 62 good?
I think we may need to clarify this here outside of today, but in terms of what I believe the issue is here is that leakage recalculation that we did when we discovered we had a problem reset our leakage targets. And what that means is now we've got the real level of leakage fully compliant with the Ofwat governance. It means that if we deliver those targets, then there is a possibility for us to get incentives. I'm not sure what the date of that Moody's report was, because if it followed the final determination, or if it was before the final determination, then I think we're probably more in a break-even neutral position on leakage, not in one of gaining incentives. But the fundamental point, I think, here is that it's comparing two sets of leakage targets, one of which is post our restatement of leakage, and the other one was pre the restatement of leakage.
Yeah, I think it's clarity between Moody's were citing for the final price determination versus the previous draft.
Confirm.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
I'd like to just ask one final question on pay. So I think in 2021, Peter, your total remuneration was £892,000, and last year you took a bonus of £91,000. I wondered whether, if you take in consideration what we've talked about today around water security, environmental performance, water quality with the public health element to it, do you think that levels of pay justified? And do you also think that's in alignment with your not-for-profit model?
I think in terms of exec remuneration, one thing that Glass has always done is we don't have the term bonus, we have the term variable pay. And variable pay puts at risk a potential earnings based on performance. Now, if you go back to 2021, that was at a time when we had 4-star environmental performance. If you look at the last year, not the year we're currently in, but the year before, when you reflected my 91,000 bonus, that only paid out 25% because 100% of our variable pay is entirely based on performance. So I think we have a system that's reflective of performance, and it pays out on that basis. Now, I personally have no influence over my own pay. That's decided by an independent committee of the board, and the one thing I would say is that it is significant. I can't say anything else about that, but it is very much linked to performance. And if we don't perform, we don't reach our earnings potential.
Except that there was 56,000 cubic metres of sewage being pumped into the Cleddau from 2022 to 2024. And I appreciate you didn't there wasn't in terms of that uptick in pay in 2023, but there was still an uptick in pay in 2024. So the performance, the environmental performance and the effect on my constituents in Pembrokeshire, the impact on the Cleddau and the river quality, and the pay is still being reflected in terms of that increase in variable pay. Well, you can call it what you like, but it still amounts to the same thing.
That variable pay did not pay out on the environmental measures and hasn't done since 2021 or 22.
But do you still think, though, that in terms of the public perception and the level of impact on people across not only my constituency but across Wales, and the environmental degradation and the importance of bringing the public back on side in respect of water quality, public health, resilience of the system, that you as a company, especially when you're in a not-for-profit model, should be more in tune in respect of when you deal with the executive pay, irrespective of whether you say that's one metric or that's another. The point is the public see it as a whole, and it's not in line with the overall performance.
I wonder if I can just come in. You talk about our not-for-profit model, just to give a little bit of context, and it probably follows from Andrew's points earlier. This was something that was given a lot of consideration when Glass was originally formed, about how do you balance the need to have the right people with the right experience in the organisation and balancing that against customers' concerns, which are understandable in terms of, because these are not insignificant sums. We absolutely acknowledge that. And that's where it landed on was that the fixed element there would be a fixed and a variable element of pay. If you look at the fixed element of pay, it is one of the lowest in the sector, and the variable element only pays out when the business achieves certain levels of performance against key criteria about customers, operational performance and strategic deliverables. As Pete says, it has not paid out on environmental performance for some time. It's paid out at 25% of the overall total last year. It is a far smaller proportion of the other overall variable bit. So it was considered, and it is considered as part of how Glass operates.
But I mean, if you compare other significant positions in Wales, for example, in Pembrokeshire with the Chief Executive of Pembrokeshire County Council is on 212, he's operating with a significant budget, has nearly 6,000 people working for him. The Chief Executive of Cardiff Council has got a budget of 1.9 billion. He's paid £229,000. I mean, and when you compare that to the level in 2021, which is £891,000, I mean, you can talk about, the environmental performance bonus wasn't hit, but like that's wildly different figures for very similar levels of responsibility and impact over people's lives and livelihoods.
We recognise these are large sums. Pete doesn't set the salary. It is set by an independent committee of our directors. It is then scrutinised by our members every year, our 60 members who perform the same role as shareholders do in a PLC, for example. And it gets a huge amount of coverage, probably far more than any PLC does. So, except they're not insignificant numbers, but it goes through a lot of scrutiny.
Andrew, you wanted to pick up?
Yeah, just one quick hot pursuit, because I think I heard some things in your answer which are actually different to some different words to what colleagues from other ward companies have said about the structure of the bonus, the low start, in effect, base load package. Would you be in a position to write to us and just explain what the structure of that model is? Clearly not commercially sensitive, the amounts, but
yes,
how that's structured. Because I think one thing, Chair, might be to understand what best practice would be in a remuneration model, which means...
But I'm beginning to think that an evidence session involving some of the independent remuneration committees might be an informative one.
Yeah.
So if you were able to provide us with that information, that would be enormously helpful. Peter, Samantha, that concludes the questions that we have for you today. Can I abuse the position of the Chair and thank you on behalf of the committee for the very direct and clear way in which you have answered our questions. We really do genuinely appreciate it. We have another 2 companies that will be appearing for us tomorrow, and by then we will have seen 9 of the water companies, and I think we will then be able to come forward with a report in due course after that. But for the meantime, both for your attendance and indeed for the manner of your engagement, we are grateful and we thank you. That concludes the sitting of the committee. Order.